Thank you for joining us for this important conversation about changes happening to our climate and what we can do about that. So let me introduce the Reverend Sarah Macias. With a Master of Divinity from Austin Seminary and a Master of Sacred Theology from Drew Theological School, Reverend Sarah Macias found her ministry call in regenerative farming. She and her husband, Rodney, now live on Sister Grove Farm in Van Alstyne, Texas, where they implement holistic grazing practices that increase biodiversity, improve the water cycle, and sequester carbon. Each of these acts of resilience give her hope as they work together toward mitigating climate change. Sarah and I attended seminary together. I know her to be a wise and winsome soul with a very good sense of humor, and I'm delighted that she is here as our host this evening. Sarah.
Thank you, Erica. It's great to be here with you, and it's wonderful to see some familiar faces and names that I recognize from Austin Seminary and some other places as well. I think I became familiar with Dr. Hayhoe's work when I was at Austin Seminary, and I heard about this climate scientist who was a evangelical Christian. And I said, I think I'd like to get to know her. And so I'm looking forward to tonight as we looking forward to a great conversation with Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist. She is also the chief scientist right now for the Nature Conservancy. And she is has been serving for several years as the endowed professor in public policy and public law and the Paul W. Horn Distinguished Professor at Texas Tech University. Go Tech. Time magazine considers her one of the most influential people on earth. And Christianity Today has her on their list of 50 women to watch. Did you know that, Dr. Hayhoe? They're watching you. She has a PBS digital series that's called Global Weirding, good title. And her TED Talk entitled, "The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change is Talk About It." It has been viewed for over 5 million times. So tonight, we're going to discuss her new book, which is called Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. It is dedicated to everyone who believes the difficult issues in life are worth talking about. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Hayhoe. Well, we want to get to know you a little bit better just as we start this conversation. And we've already said you're a climate scientist, and you're very open about the fact that you are an evangelical Christian, and that got my attention when I first heard about you. So I want to know, why is it important for people to know that you're a Christian? I'd like to know, how does your faith inform your vocation, and how does your vocation inform your faith?
Mm-hmm. Well, those are actually two very different questions that I thought through at very different times in my life. The first one regarding vocation is, it came to me early because that's the reason I am a climate scientist. I was planning to be an astrophysicist. I was almost finished my undergraduate degree. I was looking at graduate schools. I was already doing research, looking at galaxy clustering around quasars, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. But I needed an extra class to finish my degree. So I looked around and there's this brand new class in climate science. I thought, well, that looks interesting. Why not take it? Now, I had grown up being Canadian. I had grown up knowing that climate was changing and humans are responsible, but I had mentally lumped it with all of the other environmental issues that environmentalists care about, and those of us who are not environmentalists wish them well. But in taking that class, I was completely shocked to learn, first of all, how urgent climate change is. It's not a future issue. It's here and now. And that was back then, even more so today.
Right.
But what completely changed my perspective was when I realized that climate change affects us. It affects our food and our water and the safety of our homes. It exacerbates refugee crises and droughts and famines. It affects our health. It affects our children's future. It affects the economy. It affects national security. And even though climate change affects all of us, it doesn't affect us equally. People who are already marginalized, people who are already vulnerable, especially people who are poor in material resources or in social capital, those people are most impacted by a changing climate. And that's not fair because they've done the least to cause the problem in the first place. And so that sense of justice was what led me to become a climate scientist. I thought, I need to do everything I can. They might not have a voice, but I'm going to do everything I can with my voice to raise awareness of this issue and the need for urgent solutions. But for a long time, I kept that motivation to myself because, we scientists, we don't really talk about anything other than science. Seriously, for fun, we even talk about science because we enjoy it and we like it. And so it took it was probably, how many years was it? It was over 10 years between deciding to become a climate scientist to the point where I realized I wanted to tell people I was a Christian. And that idea first dawned on me when, after we moved to Lubbock, Texas, where I'm at Texas Tech University, as you know.
Right.
As soon as I got there, I started to be asked to speak at local groups because I'm the first climate scientist within a 200-mile radius. I still am 15 years later. So people figured, we might as well have the polar bear to speak, so to speak, because we're curious what she has to say.
Right.
So I had spoken to, Rotary clubs and senior citizens homes and book clubs, and I started to see that people were like, oh, okay, well, you care about that because you're a scientist. But that's not what I care about because I'm not that type of person. So then I was invited to speak at Second Baptist Church.
Yes, I know that church.
Do you know Stephanie Nash?
No, I don't.
Okay, she's the one who invited me.
Church.
I remember her name because this was so important. Now, it was not First Baptist Church. I still have not been invited to speak at First Baptist Church. And you all know what that means, right? Second Baptist can be a little more kind of edgy, but First Baptist with the white pillars on Main Street, they cannot be edgy. And it wasn't a Sunday, it was a Wednesday night, and it wasn't in the sanctuary, it was in an adult Bible study classroom. So, there was going to be no pollution or, no contamination of the sanctuary. It definitely wasn't on Sunday. And so I realized that they didn't know I was a Christian. And they didn't know that the reason I was a climate scientist was because I was a Christian, not despite it.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I decided I need to tell people this. And it felt very personal and very almost uncomfortable to share that because, it was something that was not part of my vocabulary. You keep church over here and you keep your work over here. But we need to bring our whole self to both worship and work.
Right.
And so that was the night when I decided to do it. And the difference I saw in how people reacted to what I had to say was profound because they could see themselves in the Bible verses I quoted, in the reasons I explained. We could connect on a far deeper level than previously when I've been speaking to people. And it made all the difference in the world.
Very good. Thank you. So you've already mentioned or referred to about the intersectionality, how it affects so many different areas, which I was going to ask you, because there are so many issues that, what do we focus on? And where is climate change on the list? But the way you've described it, it sounds like maybe it is the list. I mean, it affects so many different areas.
That's a great way to put it. So often we think of climate change as, item number 18 on our list, or maybe number 12, or possibly number 8. And we have to try to push it higher up the list because it's so much more urgent. But I say it doesn't have to be on the list at all. And you say it is the list, which is, I agree with that too. Why? Because the only reason we care about climate change is not because the average temperature of the entire planet is increasing by 2 or 3 or even 4 degrees. If that was the only thing that was happening, it would be a scientific curiosity. We care about it because it's affecting everything else at the top of our priority list today.
Right.
If you sat down and you wrote down the 10 things that you are most concerned about, I'm pretty sure, and I've done this quite a few times, so I'm actually very sure, I could show you how climate change is making at least 9 of those 10 things worse. And how, because you care about those 10 things, you're the perfect person to care about climate change. So the extension of that is really important. The extension is, whoever we are, whatever is on our top 10 list, we're already the perfect person to care.
Right. So why aren't we talking about it?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. And I've thought about this.
Right.
Yes. So first of all, when I say the most important thing we can do is talk about it, people immediately, their minds immediately jump to Uncle Joe or neighbor Joe, or, not speaking personally, I'm not speaking of a specific Joe, but just somebody you know who is just absolutely adamant about the fact that this is a hoax. They post about it on Facebook every day. Every conversation you have with them takes an abrupt 90-degree turn into, Biden won't let you eat burgers anymore and Bernie Sanders wants to abort all the babies. They are just obsessed with the fact that this thing can't be real. Those people who are called dismissives, because they will dismiss everything. They'll dismiss 200 years of science, 2,000 climate scientists, 2 million scientific studies. They would dismiss an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone that says global warming is real, you better fix it now, and put high letters of flame.
Right.
So who do we think we are to try to change their minds? We can't. So don't have a conversation with the 8%. They're only 8% who are dismissive. No, just leave them. Just say, what I do is if it's somebody I know well, I say, I love you, but you're wrong. Now let's talk about something else. But there's 92% of us who are not dismissive. So why don't we talk to them? People say, well, I'm not a scientist. You don't have to be a scientist, because it turns out scientific facts aren't what change people's minds. What changes people's minds are the heart and the hands. Why do we care? How are we being affected here and now? And in my book, I have a lot about Texas. And what do real solutions look like? In my book, I have tons of solution stories too that you could share. But then people say, well, why bother talking? Because everybody around me thinks the same thing. And I say, first of all, how do you know if you're not talking about it? And second of all, if everybody around you thinks the same thing, then they're worried. 70% of people are worried, but only 8% are activated. So how do we activate people? The first step is communication, saying, hey, did you know this is what the solution looks like? Or this is what we could do together. This is what our congregation should do. Or this is what we could do together where we live. So, and then people say, last thing is that it's just too depressing. And it is. If all you're talking about is ice sheets and polar bears, it is very depressing. But that's not the most important thing to talk about. The most important thing to talk about is what's happening here and now, and what real solutions look like.
Solutions. And maybe that's part of what's missing sometimes, and why people don't want to talk about a problem that they feel like there's not a solution, but you think that there is.
There's no one solution. There's
Right.
no silver bullet, but there is a ton of silver buckshot. And there's a great resource, actually, I'm going to put in the chat here, since we're in the chat, which is really fun.
Good.
It's called Project Drawdown. And I'm going to put it right there. And what they've done is they're almost like an encyclopedia of, oh, there you go. Excellent. It's a book too. An encyclopedia of solutions. And so if you want to know what solutions look like, go there, pick one, read it, and then start a conversation with these great words. Did you know?
Very good. The divided world that your title mentions, we know that's real, because all of us on this call are living in that polarized, divisive world. There was a report that you mentioned called America's Divided Mind that got my attention. It says that Americans who identify themselves as either Democrats or Republicans view one another less as fellow citizens and more as enemies who represent a profound threat to their identities. And our identities is part of, when our identity feels threatened by a conversation or a challenge, that our defense mechanisms go up. And then that's an obstacle to a conversation.
That's exactly what happens. And a thermometer isn't Democrat or Republican. And a hurricane Now, if you live in Houston, you can verify this. A hurricane does not knock on the door of your house and say, excuse me, who did you vote for in the last presidential election? Before it rips off your roof and floods your home. So this issue matters to all of us, but it has become one of the most politically polarized in the country. To the point where now, whether somebody agrees with the simple facts that climate is changing and humans are responsible and the impacts are serious, which we scientists have known for decades, if not centuries, it's not how educated or how smart they are. There's some very educated, very smart people, but if they're on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, it's become one of their tenets of faith.
Right.
Sadly, here in the United States, and we're seeing this happening every day, those of us, especially in Christian communities, people are replacing their theology with their ideology.
Mm-hmm.
People are being, as Alan Jacob from Baylor says, people are being catechized not by the church or the Bible or, Christian teachings. They're being catechized by the church of Facebook, by the church of their social circles, by the news articles that are shared there. That's how people are learning. And because of that, it's become an identity issue. When unfortunately, as Kate said in the chat, science doesn't care whether you believe it or not. As I would say, gravity doesn't care. You could say, I don't believe in gravity, but if you step on the cliff, you're still going down.
Right.
So why is it polarized? Though it's polarized because people didn't want to act on climate. But if you say it's real, all the scientists agree, the poorest people are already suffering the impacts, but I don't want to fix it, that makes you a bad person. And most people don't want to be perceived or even perceive themselves as a bad person. So they engage in what I call in the book motivated reasoning. In other words, we say, okay, we begin with, we don't want to fix it. Now we're going to go out and use our very smart brains to find reasons, and the internet is very helpful here, reasons why we don't want to fix it that makes sense. And those scientists are just making it up. That sounds pretty good. It's just a natural cycle. That one sounds good too. It's too expensive. And what about those other countries? That sounds great. So we get all these excuses and we use them as sort of window dressing to hide the real reason, which is we're really afraid of what we see as the solutions. And that's why, again, talking about really positive, constructive solutions is essential, because when people realize we could have more energy, not less, we could have cheaper energy, not more expensive energy. I mean, look at the price of gas at the pump right now, right? We could have a world where 10 million people don't die every year from breathing in air pollution from burning fossil fuels. We could have a world that is better than the one we have, not worse. And when people see that, that's when people's perspectives change.
Yeah. So you suggest that we must focus on areas where we agree rather than disagree. Are there areas that we agree on?
Well, there are if you go up high enough. So let's start at the very top and then work our way down. So let's do this for all humans first, but then for Christians, we can go a lot further down before we separate.
Right.
So let's talk about all humans. Almost all humans would agree that we want a better future. Almost all humans want to have clean air to breathe. Almost all humans want to have water come out of the tap when they turn it on and that water to be clean. Almost all humans want enough food to eat. Almost all humans want a safe place to live. A home for their family where they don't have to worry about war or flood or foreclosures. When it all comes down to it, most of us want a lot of the same things. And if we don't fix climate change, we're not going to get any of those things. It isn't about saving the planet. I didn't call my book How to Save the Planet. I call my book Saving Us.
Right.
Because we're the ones at risk. And when I say we, I include humans and many other living things as well, which Genesis 1 says we have responsibility over. So if you work your way down, that's a lot of things people agree on. And climate change threatens them. So then we could be like, okay, well, what could we do about this? And once you're coming from the perspective of we're all on the same page that we want this, what can we do? It's a lot easier to find solutions. And that's why cities are moving much faster than the federal government. Because when you live in the same city, you can drill down even farther. It's my home that's flooding. It's my air that's polluted. It's my water that's not coming out of the tap. Then we can really reach agreement over what we could do that makes sense. Now, as Christians, we can do the same type of thing. It isn't just about this world. It's the fact that we have built our lives on a set of fundamental beliefs that whether we are Orthodox, Coptic, Catholic, or Protestant, we all agree that God made this universe. We agree that God gave us responsibility. The Hebrew word is rada, over every living thing on this planet. We agree that God finds joy and pleasure in the tiniest, seemingly most insignificant aspect of creation. And we agree that Jesus told us that we are to be recognized by our love for others. So if we agree on those things,
that's a lot.
That's a huge filter to apply to what can we do when people are suffering today.
Right. So let's talk about the church. And I wonder if you've heard of the name Gus Speth. He's an environmental attorney, co-founder of Natural Resources Defense Council. I remember a quote where he said, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, listen up, church, to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And he said, we lawyers and scientists don't know how to do that. So those are his words, but I wonder how they resonate with you in line with the theme of this book. And if there is a transformation needed, what role does the church play?
I could not agree more. I've read that quote before and I completely agree with it. We scientists, and speaking of the whole community here, we thought that if we just share more information, people will change their minds. And that's what we did for 70 years. 70 years, scientists have known and accepted that this was happening and that it was serious and that we could measure the impacts. And what happened? Not much. We do need a spiritual awakening. And that's why when you read my book, you'll see there's only one chapter on the science, just one chapter. And it's just sort of a, here's what you need to know if somebody asks and you want to feel equipped. That's all. The words that show up, if you did sort of a wordle of my book for which words show up most, it wouldn't be science. It wouldn't be greenhouse gases. It wouldn't be global temperature. The two words that would show up most across the whole book would be hope and love, because love really is the answer. A failure to act on climate change is a failure to love. If we love each other as we've been loved by God, that means that we look out for each other. We make decisions based on others' welfare. We look out for and supply their needs. If we Christians were recognized by our love, the world would be a completely different place.
Amen. So, hope. Let's talk about that. What is hope and what is it not? And as a climate scientist, someone who pays attention to the consequences of our choices, where do you find hope?
So often these days, there's so many people who are panicked, anxious, depressed, who have fallen to outright doomerism, as it's called, that I get accused on an almost daily basis of peddling hopium. And that is a false perception of hope, that hope is somehow just, positive thinking. If we just think positive thoughts, or if we just sort of ignore the problem, or if we just say, oh, somebody will fix it, not sure who, but somebody will fix it, that somehow it'll all work out. Well, it won't. It will not work out if that's what we do. And that is not hope. So when the Bible talks about hope, for example, in the book of Romans, where does the Apostle Paul begin? He begins with suffering. He begins talking about hope when he talks about suffering. Why? Because we don't need hope when everything's going fine. We don't need hope when, we're in cushy circumstances. There's nothing wrong with our life. Why do we need hope? Everything's fine today. We need hope when life is at its darkest and blackest. When did, the people who lived in London in World War II, they needed hope during the Blitz. When you look at when people have most needed hope in history, it began in profound suffering. And then Paul goes on to say, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. Character produces hope that will not disappoint. Why? Because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts. It's directly connected to love. And tied to that is another verse that doesn't mention hope, but it's all about action, because what psychologists and social scientists have found, parallels the Bible, of course, very well, is that when we act, then we feel hope. Too often people wait to feel hope before they act. But when we act, we realize, wow, this giant boulder is not sitting at the bottom of the hill with only a few hands on it. It's already at the top of the hill, rolling down the hill in the right direction. It's already got millions of hands on it. When I add mine, it goes a little faster. That's hope. So in 2 Timothy, Paul's writing to Timothy, and he says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. Fear paralyzes us. He says, God has given you a spirit of power. What is power? Today, a more modern word would be empowered. We're empowered. We have agency. We can act. So God has given us the ability to act. And then the verse continues, and love. So that's considering others, not just ourselves. And as a scientist, my favorite part, a sound mind to make good decisions based on the information God has given us. And when we use our ability to act in love with a sound mind to make good decisions, we find that hope is all around us and we can share it with others.
So it's not that fear is bad, unless it depends on what we do with that fear, because fear is a natural emotion to a feeling of feeling threatened.
Exactly. And as I talk about in my book, the two toughest chapters to write in the book were the chapters on fear and the chapters on guilt. I had to sort of think through those in a way that I never had before to try to figure out, well, what purpose does fear serve? Because fear is, like you just said, it's a logical response to what's happening to our planet. It is very logical. But what do we do with it? It turns out that if we know what to do, fear motivates us, goads us into action. But if we don't know what to do, and 70% of people in the United States are worried about climate change,
right.
50% feel hopeless and helpless and don't know where to start. So half of us, if we're exposed to more fear-based messages, it paralyzes us even more. We don't need more fear if we're already anxious. We need to know what we can do about it. We need to move people from worried to activated.
Right. Or was another person that I remember his quote on hope was that hope is an imperative. He has a book called Hope is an Imperative. He says it's a verb with your sleeves rolled up. And I think your sleeves are rolled up, Dr. Hayhoe. Let's do a little lightning round, if you will. We're entering the part of the game show here where we have the lightning round, and so I'm interested in hearing what your response is to some very familiar comments and phrases that I know you've heard. We all have. So the first one is, God gave us dominion.
So if somebody has dominion over a corporation and they run it into the ground, they leave it a smoking ruin, they throw everybody out of work, they pollute the entire environment around their factory, and then they walk away with billions of dollars and leave everybody else impoverished, sick, and dead, what would we think of that person? Not much. That's just our human understanding of the word dominion. But again, the original Hebrew word is radah, R-A-D-A-H. And if you do a manuscript study and you look at the context where that same Hebrew word is used elsewhere in the Bible, you will get God's definition of radah rather than people's. And for example, in Psalms, there's one place where the psalmist is writing about God's rule. And he says, and he will radah, that same word, and he will listen to the cries of the needy. He will help the poor. So in that sense, radah is used very clearly for listening to the downtrodden, the marginalized, the disadvantaged, the very people who are most affected by climate change, and by that person who has that authority and that responsibility to care for them. So when people use that word as an excuse to just pillage the earth, they haven't read the Bible. And the best answer is to go back and read it.
Right. So yes, we do have RADA. Let's roll our sleeves up and do something. Mm-hmm. Right. Very good. Okay. We may have climate change, but God is in control.
Well, God is in control, but in Genesis 1, it says God gave humans responsibility, again, RADA, over every living thing on this planet. And in Revelation, it says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. So it's very clear that God has given us the responsibility, the parable of the talents, where God gives people the talents and goes away and comes back and says, what did you do with my gifts? That's us and our planet.
Well, okay. Here's another one. I don't care what you say. I don't believe in climate change.
I don't either, because it's not a religion. A thermometer doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It still tells you we're getting warmer. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a couple of quick references in the chat, because I have a little series called Global Weirding on YouTube, and it's really interesting. I did this with our local PBS station. And so I address frequently asked questions like, how is climate change affecting hurricanes? And, what's happening in Texas? But I said, I'd really like to do one episode on what does the Bible say about climate change, and address, if God's in control, why does it matter? The world's going to end anyway, so why do we care? So I did this, and I put the link right there in the chat to that little episode that you can watch after we're done. It's our second most watched episode.
Wow.
Everybody wants to watch it because these are such common questions we have.
Yeah.
I also did a New York Times essay called "I Don't Believe in Climate Change," so I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna put that one in here too.
Good.
Okay.
Climate change is not my problem. I don't care about polar bears.
So this is a really big one, because people say, how do I make people care about X in order to care about climate change? And if you want to make everybody care about climate change for the same reason you do, you just made your job 1,000 times harder than if you spend the time getting to know them and figuring out why they already care. They just didn't realize it. So I was in Iowa a while ago, and people said, how do you talk about polar bears in Iowa? And I said, unless there's some polar bear population in Iowa that I've never heard of before, you don't. I said, what you talk about is the crazy floods. What you talk about is the amazing regenerative agriculture that they're practicing that puts the carbon back in the soil. Talk about the biochar work the university is doing. Talk about the renewable energy group that's taking old cooking oil and turning it into biofuel. Talk about the wind that you're getting, over 30% of your energy fund. That's what you talk about in Iowa. So what do we talk about in Texas? Well, again, unless there's a population of polar bears somewhere that I haven't seen yet, we don't. Talk about how hurricanes are getting stronger. Talk about how our droughts are more intense. Talk about our crazy heat. And yes, even our winter storm was affected by the warming Arctic. But talk about how we're number 1 in wind. We're number 2 in solar, but we're moving up. Talk about how the city of Houston is going to meet its Paris targets. The biggest army base in the US is in Texas, and it's almost half powered by wind and solar energy, saving taxpayers millions of dollars. Talk about what's happening here in Texas, and it is amazing. And Kate, I do care about polar bears for sure. I think polar bears are awesome. But if you want to make everybody care about polar bears first, before they care about climate change, we're never going to fix this thing. Whereas if you show them who they already are, whether they're a small business owner, former military, or live in Texas, or parent, or Christian, whoever they already are is the perfect person to care. Then after they care, then the polar bears will come along too.
One more, and then I think we've got some questions from the chat. Yeah, we've got climate change, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, that actually, so there's 5 different types of arguments when it comes to rejecting the need for climate action. It's not real. It's not us. It's not bad. It's too expensive to fix it, or they need to do something first. And it's too late. You really should have warned us earlier. So that's number 5. And it's true that some of the impacts are here today. it's as if we've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for weeks and even years. We have some spots on our lungs. We have impaired lung capacity already today, but we don't have emphysema, we don't have lung cancer, and we're not dead. So when's the best time to stop? As soon as possible. How much?
Right.
As much as possible. And what's going to happen? The quicker we stop, the better off we'll be. What is at stake here again is human civilization. That's what's at stake, not the planet itself. It will still be circling the sun long after we're gone. There will be cockroaches, there will be possums, and there will likely be deer too. Those are all survivors. But will there be human civilization? That question has yet to be answered by us. Our future's in our hands. And I know that destruction is only guaranteed if we give up and we decide there's nothing we can do. If we decide we're doomed, that's when we truly are doomed.
Very good. Okay, well, let's see what questions have come up in the poll.
Yes, and people can go there. There's a ton of questions, which is great. And remember, you can upvote questions that you most want answered.
Yeah, the upvoting.
There hasn't been a lot of upvoting happening. So even if you didn't have a question, please go click on the poll EV link in the chat. There it is right there. I could just put it in. Go click there, look at the questions, and give a thumbs up to the ones that you most want us to get to, okay? Even if you don't have a question, do that anyways. Okay, all right. The number one question is, 24 votes now. What have you found to be the most and the least successful ways to encourage local elected officials and staff to take action on climate issues? How do you build a community, and how do we get the global issue down to the local level? I love that you asked this, because all action really is local, right? And what happens at the global level started locally. It started with somebody talking to somebody else. Literally, everything that's happened in this world started with somebody. And it started with them talking about it with somebody else, and them talking about it with somebody else, and them getting together and saying, we really should do this. So how do you have a positive, constructive conversation with anyone? Start with something that you agree on, not something you disagree on. And we talked about that, right? Better future, water coming out of the tap, food in the grocery store, safe home. Start with something you agree on. Connect the dots to how climate change affects what you both care about, and then bring up a positive, constructive solution that that person or people you're speaking with could get on board with. How does this apply to elected officials? Well, they are people too. I know sometimes you might not think that, but they are people just like us, people who want clean water, people who want food in the grocery store, people who want a safe place to live, and people who hear from their constituents if they don't have it. So with the politician, it's really important, again, do your research. And Citizens Climate Lobby, for example, is a great organization that does a really good job of training people to do your research and find out what that politician has done that's right. Everybody's got something you can praise, some area of emphasis that matters to them. Start with that, connect the dots. And in my book, I have a story about people who've done that, connecting the dots with politicians, and then do your homework and try to figure out what are some solutions that maybe if you're talking to a city official, like a city council person, what are some solutions that another city's doing that we might want to do too? What are solutions that another church is doing that we might want to do too in our church? What are some solutions another university or college or seminary is doing that we might want to do too? Bring some suggestions to the table, and don't be dogmatic about it. You know, it's like, here's a sort of a menu of suggestions. Be prepared to co-develop those suggestions, not saying you have to do this, but saying, here's some options. What do you think? And often we can find much more positive, constructive conversations that way. How do we build that local community? It all begins with using your voice. And I want to share a really encouraging story with you, and then we will get to the other questions, but this is such a good story. So in December 2018, my TED Talk came out on how the most important thing you can do about climate change is talk about it. And then 5 months later, I was doing one of my bundled trips where when I travel in person, I do so many things in the same place. It's like literally every minute is full. And I was in London, England, and it was the end of the day. I had done like 6 events in the same day. I did my last lecture at the London School of Economics. I was like walking back down the aisle thinking longingly of the tea that I was going to have and how I was going to put my feet up at the end of the day. And I saw someone waiting to talk to me. So I stopped and he introduced himself and he said his name was Glenn. And he lived in the borough of Wandsworth, which is just outside of London, about 200,000 people. And he said that he's really worried about climate change. And he'd been banging his head against the wall for a long time and nothing had been happening at the local scale. And then he saw my TED Talk and he thought, okay, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to try this. I've tried everything else. I'm just going to try having conversations about why it matters and about what we can do to fix it. So he said he started to have conversations and he started to write down how many conversations he'd had, and then how many conversations the people he talked to had had, and then how many conversations the people they talked to had had. And he said, I have a list. Would you like to see it? And I said, well, I've never heard anybody say that before. Sure. So he reaches in his bag and he pulls out a list. And I was expecting, 75, 80 names. He pulls out a list of 10,000.
Oh my goodness.
And I checked back in with him when I was writing the book, because I wanted to tell a story. And he said they're up to almost 13,000. Now, after just 5 months, the city council had voted to declare a climate emergency. After 2 years, they voted to put up 20 million pounds, which for a small town is quite a bit of money, for a climate resilience plan. And you know what? Last week, they just sent me a message. They have a Twitter account now called 10,000 Conversations. And the city of Wandsworth now has an official climate conversations program where they are deliberately engaging all the citizens of that town in conversations. The city itself is doing it about what their shared climate future look like. Is that not just the most amazing thing I've ever heard? And it started with one person, and he built that community how? By using his voice to talk about why it mattered and what they could do to fix it. Wow.
That's remarkable.
Yes.
So the next question is, what is the best step in a not yet act?
Yes. So that's where, let's see, Bruce put a link in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, you'll see Bruce's link.
Yes.
To a series of short videos that I did for Tear Fund. Now, Tear Fund is a Christian charity that works primarily in some of the poorest countries in the world on basic access to food and water and education and energy for people who wouldn't have any of that. And because they work so closely in low-income countries, they realized a long time ago that climate change is the hole in the bucket. You're pouring all of your money and effort and support and time and prayers and everything you have into this bucket, and there's a hole in the bottom, and the hole's getting bigger and bigger, and the hole is climate change. If you don't patch that hole, you can't fill the bucket. So Tear Fund is fantastic. If you check them out on social media, they have a really good Instagram account. They share all kinds of great and very positive stories. Tear Fund is already in Australia and Germany and Canada, and it's just getting started in the US as well. It's originally from Scotland. So during the pandemic, they contacted me and they said, we're concerned that most of our churches in Scotland don't understand why climate change matters. They might, if you ask them, is it real? Most people would say, sure, but they don't understand how it matters to us as Christians. So they said, would you be willing to do a series of 9 short videos, and we'll send you the topics of the videos that we could package and turn into a curriculum for a church? So I said, sure. So I did the 9 short videos and I sent it to them. They put it together on the website that Bruce just put in the chat right there. And when I saw them, when I was in Glasgow for the climate meeting in November, they said 150 churches in Scotland have gone through this course and they are totally on board and on fire. They're like, what can we do? This is important. As Christians, we must care. Tell us more. And so now they're being translated into German. They're using them in Australia. They're starting to use them in Canada. You can use it. You don't have to, Tear Fund just puts them out there. So that's a great way to start a discussion. You can have a book discussion of Saving Us. You could do the Tear Fund videos and discussion questions. The Evangelical Environmental Network has a lot of resources. And on my own website, which I'll put in the chat, I have a list of ideas and resources that you can do with churches as well. Everything from involving your youth group to creating a green team to modeling good stewardship to ways to talk about it in church. So let's see, where is my church page? Just a second here. Here it is. Okay, there are lots of links here, and I would encourage you to check this out.
Very good. Do we have time for another one, Erica? Okay, you're nodding yes. Looks like another one is about divestment from fossil fuel companies as a way to make change happen. Yet how can we partner with these same companies in this change? A more restorative justice approach than punitive?
Mm-hmm. So divestment is the idea that rather than investing our endowments or our personal pension funds in the fossil fuel industry, we remove the funds that we are using to invest in those industries. Now, some people like engine number one. If you're looking for an interesting story, Google engine number one. They deliberately bought Exxon shares in order to have enough to show up at the shareholder meeting in order to push them to have a climate change resolution. So that's a very intelligent way. That's the opposite of divestment. They actually invested to get a foothold to then say, okay, because we're a shareholder, we demand that you do this. And they got a bunch of other shareholders to vote with them. But in general, a lot of organizations and especially churches are divesting on moral reasons because fossil fuels are a highly extractive industry that leave behind a legacy of massive human suffering from the coal mining areas of Appalachia to the oil and gas in the Niger Delta. Burning fossil fuels produces air pollution that's responsible for 10 million premature deaths per year. And then you've got climate change on top of it. So people are divesting. But a couple months ago, I got a message from the Presbyterian Church of Ireland. And they said, we've been having a conversation for the last year about divesting from fossil fuels. And we just had our General Assembly. And during the call to divest, they read from my book, Saving Us, which is amazing. But they said, we aren't just divesting, we are calling for divestment of funds and investment in the communities, the people whose livelihoods depend on coal mining or oil and gas extraction. That is how we show love. Not only by not contributing to the problem, but by actively engaging in those communities, many of which are, and especially in the US today, are already devastated, not by climate action, but simply by the fact that coal is dirty and expensive and it's going out of use. So I love that two-prong approach. It's divesting on one hand and it's investing on the other.
Very good. And then there's a question about a tax on carbon. Why do you support that?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I listen to economists because they're the experts on that. And what economists say is that our biggest problem is that we don't value carbon pollution. It's called an externality. And so we pump all of this carbon into the atmosphere and it's causing already hundreds of billions of dollars in damages every single year through supersizing our extreme weather events. But there's no way for us to connect that with the decisions that we make every day because there's no price signal. So just about every single economist in the world, including the two who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, support putting a price on carbon that's low and then gradually ramping it up year after year. And then this is really important, using the funds to support low and middle income families so their budget and bottom line is not harmed by the carbon price. But then if somebody still wants to drive, a gas guzzler, they can do it. They just have to pay the price. And then use the rest of the funds to support efficiency programs and winterization of your house programs and invest in public transportation and clean energy. And you know what? In Canada, we've had a price on carbon at the national scale now for 3 years. And low-income households are benefiting financially from the price of carbon. In addition to the benefits that they have, the indirect benefits from reducing the impacts of climate change, they actually have direct benefits due to the money they receive back from the revenue. So that's why I support it.
Very good. I think we're winding down our hour, looks like. I've got one last question for you, Dr. Hayhoe, and this has been just a wonderful conversation. So thank you for making time for us in your busy schedule. You mentioned a quote in your book that is attributed to Augustine about hope, how hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. What else can you tell us about what you are angry about, and where do you find courage? And then I'd also add to that, where is the good news?
I went to Paris for the 2015 climate conference where the Paris Agreement was signed. And so often we here in North America think of the Paris Agreement as all the rich countries that have to cut their emissions. But when I was there, I was surrounded by people from almost every other country in the world. 12 countries are primarily responsible for this problem. And there's almost 200 countries around the planet. I was surrounded by people, many of them Christians, from the Philippines, from Malawi, from India, from Bangladesh, from Indonesia, from the South Sea islands in the South Pacific that could lose their entire country as climate changes. I was surrounded by people there who were just there to say, we haven't created this problem yet, we are suffering the impacts. And after that, when I came home, for a couple of weeks after I came home from Paris, I was so angry that I couldn't talk to anyone about this, because if I heard one more person say, oh, it's not real, or you scientists are just making it up, I would just have, grabbed them by their lapels, shook them back and forth and said, what are you talking about, you selfish person? Because how can you look in the face of another human being who is telling you the extreme suffering that they and their family and their community and their church and their country is going through, and just put your fingers in your ears and your hands over your eyes? It is like the Pharisees and the whitewashed tombs that Jesus spoke of so harshly. So the anger is definitely there. But when you sort of step back and take a breath, you realize, you know what? Most people are just scared. Most people are living in fear. Most people have been fed false information by people they trust. And today, that's who I save my anger for, the people who know better, the people who know very well that this thing is real, but they are just towing the party line for their own personal profit or gain, because they don't look to the future. They don't look to their love of their sisters or their brothers. They are only looking to themselves. And how would anybody know different if they haven't heard? And that's very biblical too, right? How should they believe if they have not heard? So that's why it is so important for all of us to be using our voices to share with people why this matters and what we can do to fix it, because I truly believe that if we take the Bible seriously, we will be out at the front of the line demanding climate action in the name of love.
There is good news in that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Again, this has been just a remarkable conversation and a wonderful participation from those who registered. And I believe this has been recorded. Is that right, Erica? So it'll be shared?
Yes, absolutely. And again, on behalf of Austin Seminary and Education Beyond the Walls at Austin Seminary, thank you so much, Dr. Hayhoe, for sharing this time, and Reverend Macias for your wise and wonderful questions. This has been a delight, and I know I am leaving full of hope that I too can use my voice. Thank you all for joining in this conversation, and encourage you to talk about it, to keep talking about it, and keep having conversations like this.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Sarah. This has just been wonderful.
It's been a delight and an honor.